Good afternoon, Facebook. Fully recuperated now. Well, not fully recuperated, but back from a camping trip out to Hood Canal. Got back yesterday, left obviously the morning before. Beautiful, beautiful time. I managed to remember to get sunscreen and insect repellent, but I didn't apparently use enough sunscreen because it's probably impossible to tell given the light that I've got going here. But I've gotten a sunburn on my freshly shaven head. And when I woke up this morning, stuffed up from all the allergies that I suffer from, the inability to breathe through my nose, the congestion and nasal problems combined with the sensation of a sunburn on my head made me feel like I was feverish and stuffed up. So for a little while before getting out of bed, my body almost had me convinced that I was sick, but I'm not. I'm feeling just fine. Allergies suck, but combined with a sunburn, that was an unhappy combination. But I'm back now and did a fair amount of reading and trying to decide what I wanted to talk about today. And I have brought together things that I have read in the news over the last 24 to 48 hours, things that I've seen social on my social media, Facebook friends and such, text conversations that I've had with close personal friends, and also an experience that I had with my friends after we got back from our camping trip yesterday. These have all sort of come together to help me decide what it is that I want to talk about today. Let's begin, as usual, with a look at where our figures are. Worldometers.info/coronavirus informed me that just shy of 4 million cases worldwide are now being reported. It was 3.9 something or other million. I imagine that probably as of right now, since it's been a couple minutes since I looked, it's probably climbed up above 4 million. I'm not going to bother with going through the list of countries. The United States is by far the country with the highest number of reported cases, followed by Spain, Italy, United Kingdom. I'm not going to look again at the percentage of the population. I do want to clarify one thing I said. I think I may have slightly misspoken a couple of days ago when I was talking about how seroprevalence surveys are showing that the number may be far different than what's being reported. I kept on saying that figure was way lower or way smaller. The figure that's way lower or way smaller is the percentage of people who have had coronavirus who have died from it. That is the number that's way smaller. The denominator in that fraction is actually much larger, making the outcome of that fraction much smaller. But anyway, that's just semantics. As of right now, the United States is reporting 1,308,977 positive or confirmed cases. As of right now, the United States is reporting 77,914 fatalities. State of New York obviously still leads that pack by a long shot. 340,472 cases in New York, 26,581 COVID deaths. In the state of Washington, we are now looking at nearly 17,000 cases, 16,914. Our death toll sits at 904. 904. And yet, the state ranked just below Washington is Tennessee, where we are reporting nearly 17,000. They are reporting 14,000. 14,000 cases, but they're only reporting 239 deaths. That is an enormous discrepancy in the infection fatality rate between Washington and the state of Tennessee. No explanation for this has been offered. I haven't even seen anybody digging into this. Why is there such a disparity between the various infection fatality rates as you examine figures state by state? I think that's kind of worth looking at. We hear a lot of political figures, specifically ones who are in favor of maintaining our current mitigation efforts, the lockdowns, the shelter-in-place orders nationwide, etc. And endlessly, we hear these same figures talking about how their decisions are driven by science and data. They always say it with such self-importance. Well, I think it's a fairly germane question, very relevant. Why is a state whose rate of infection statewide is very close to ours relatively, 14,000 to 17,000 is not that big a difference, and yet the mortality rate is so vastly different? I've been pointing out that Texas has a very high number of cases, but also a very low mortality rate as compared with other places. How exactly are the scientists and data analysts who are informing our policy, how are they explaining these differences? I don't see that there's a lot of eagerness to do so. Those questions are dodged, and dodged very quickly whenever they're brought up. And that brings me to local politics with respect to coronavirus and Governor Inslee. He's been sued yet again. A few days ago, I pointed out that Governor Inslee had been sued by a group of people, including Tim Eyman, who I described at the time as a political activist. That's how he is described in the verbiage of the lawsuit. Just for those of you who aren't aware, Tim Eyman is a conservative who is challenging Governor Inslee for election to the office of governor of Washington this year. But Mr. Eyman was part of a lawsuit which claims that Inslee has created an unacceptable tyranny in the state of Washington in violation of the Declaration of Independence upon which this nation was constructed. I have that lawsuit right here. The whole thing. He's been sued yet again. This lawsuit was brought on the 5th of May. United States District Court for the Western District of Washington at Tacoma, my hometown. In late 2019 or early 2020, a novel viral infection began circulating in Washington. The first hint of problems came in early 2020 when dozens of residents of 2 nursing homes in King County fell sick and died and were confirmed to have been infected with COVID-19, then running rampant in Hubei province, China. Well, the introduction goes on, but essentially there are listed as the plaintiffs a number of local politicians, not just political activists or business owners, but actual politicians. We're talking about Drew McEwen, Andrew Barkus, Chris Corey, Brandon Vick, Michael McKee, Lee Pfluger, Fran Wills, and Bruce Russell, they being listed as the plaintiffs, the defendant Inslee in his official capacity as the governor of Washington. This is a complaint for declaratory and injunctive relief. Now, just to be specific in terms of the cause of action, the cause of action in the lawsuit here, the allegations of the previous paragraphs are incorporated as if fully set forth in each of the following counts and causes of actions. Count 1, declaratory relief that this proclamation, and we're talking about the Stay at Home, Stay Healthy proclamation, the proclamation infringes the First Amendment rights to free exercise of religion. Count 2, declaratory relief that proclamations infringe the First Amendment right to peaceable assembly. Count 3, declaratory relief that Proclamations infringe on the Fifth Amendment right to liberty, which has been deprived of plaintiffs without due process of law. Count 4, declaratory relief that proclamations infringe the constitutional right of people to work for a living. Count 5, declaratory relief that proclamations deprive citizens of property without due process of law. Count 6, violation of civil rights. Count 7, constitutionality of state statutes. And Count 8, injunctive relief. Plaintiffs have suffered, and in the absence of injunctive relief, will continue to suffer the deprivation of constitutional rights. So this is yet another separate lawsuit which has been brought against the governor. Now, how has Governor Inslee responded? The politicians, and he's referring to the plaintiffs in this lawsuit, are not compliant with the science that is very clear on this. That if we today released all of our efforts, if we stopped in our tracks halfway through this effort, or 2/3 through this effort, this virus is going to come back with a vengeance. And apparently, as politicians, as far as I can tell, that doesn't bother them too much. Governor Inslee routinely talks about science. I've pointed this out before. In the verbiage of his proclamations, in his prepared statements on camera, he is so adamant to make sure he reminds us constantly of his devotion and adherence to science and facts. Well, he was asked directly by a reporter in a press availability to respond to this new lawsuit. The question was, this afternoon, Republican lawmakers filed a lawsuit to stop the stay-at-home order, saying COVID-19 is no longer a crisis. They point to the closure of the Harbor Hospital. The reporter mentioned they were curious if the governor had had a chance to see this and if he wanted to respond. This is what the governor had to say. I've just looked at it very briefly. I think it would be a horrific surprise to the over 800 families that have lost a loved one already to this pandemic to think that this is not a crisis. I believe that position is biologically ignorant and humanly heartless. It's just ignorant because this is a very transmittable disease. It continues to transmit disease. We had hundreds of new cases just yesterday. And he went on to reemphasize that he thinks it's heartless to think that some people are somehow disposable citizens. Okay. The governor was asked a question point blank about a lawsuit that's being brought against him. The verbiage of this lawsuit, it's very many pages long. I'm not going to recite the whole thing to you. But the verbiage of the lawsuit is also very heavy in science and data, in pointing out how the models and the projections have proven to be unreliable at best. So the verbiage of the lawsuit itself depends and relies on scientific information. It might be scientific information which is used to extrapolate a different trajectory and a different outcome than the one that is being used to justify these lockdowns, but it is very science-driven. And yet in his response, the governor, he doesn't rebut what's being said. He doesn't refute it with scientific facts. He simply implies that the people who disagree with his political ideology want to see people die. That they are heartless, that they are biologically ignorant, and that they want to watch people die, and that they consider some segments of our population as disposable. That is his reaction to being sued on these grounds. On the grounds that constitutional rights are being infringed, and that there happens to be a lot of room within scientific analysis to suggest that this pandemic is not nearly as severe or terrifying or monstrous as it was predicted to be at the beginning. whatever your political leanings may be, and whatever your opinion or feelings about coronavirus may be, there's a lot of unanswered questions. There's a lot of internal inconsistency. There's a lot of these models and projections which have been proven way wrong as time has passed. And yet anybody who uses those facts as a basis on which to formulate a cogent challenge of the governor's decisions here, he is simply dismissing them as heartless, and that they view the elderly as disposable citizens. That is a cheap, sleazy attack that is motivated purely by politics. I've said before on this webcast, I don't like Governor Inslee. And this is why. The politicians suing are not compliant with the science that is very clear on this. If we released all of our efforts, this virus would come back with a vengeance, and these people just don't care. Don't care, huh? I love how he slams the people who disagree with him as being ignorant and heartless. He's the leader of our state, not just in terms of policy, but he's also sort of the leader of state, not just the leader of government. In the state of Washington, he speaks on these lofty moral terms. And it's being echoed all throughout the state by just people in general. I was scrolling through social media, just scrolling out of boredom, waiting to fall asleep, scrolling through Facebook. And I came across a post made by a Facebook friend of mine, whom I shall not name. If you click on this person's profile and scroll down just what she has posted or reposted, almost every single post is an angry insult aimed at people who don't like what's happening with the statewide lockdown. Making fun of people who don't wear masks properly. Making fun of people they're just coming up with all these snarky insults, and it's a very consistent theme, very strongly reinforced within the content of her page. This post is what I saw. And I quote, "Feeling bummed about humans again. It's my own fault for reading the comments, but damn, some people are spare parts." I'm going to read that last part again. Some people are spare parts. What an ugly way to devalue a human being. And based on what? Something that was said in a comment to a post on Facebook? You're going to devalue someone or some group of people to being worth nothing more than spare parts. How virtuous you are. What a wonderful person you must be. How lofty is your virtue and your intelligence and your intellect and your worth that you can look at someone else and say that they're worth nothing more than spare parts. You know, when my friends and I returned from our camping trip, before we all went back to our own homes where we each live alone, we took a moment to sit on the back deck of my friend's apartment and eat a hamburger and just sort of reflect on the trip that we had shared. And while we sat on that back deck, eating our hamburgers, one of us noticed that in an open doorway of an apartment about 2 buildings away, there stood a woman in the doorway. It was just an open door, so it was a dark doorway. within which stood this woman wearing a mask and staring at us, directly staring at us. She didn't move. She didn't gesture. She just stood in that doorway wearing her mask, staring at us. My assumption, and that's all it is an assumption, but most likely correct, is that she was outraged that we were not locked away in a state of masked paranoia like she was, that we were standing out on the back deck of this apartment, eating a hamburger together, talking and enjoying ourselves. And she just stood there in silent judgment, glaring up at us. I wonder if she looked at us as being worth not much more than just spare parts. And it brings to mind this idea that seems to be so rampant throughout our culture right now, that all it takes to be a good person is to hold and express the right set of beliefs. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what you achieve, what you build. It only matters that your mind is right. And it's something that's constantly reinforced. Younger people are being brought up these days to believe that all that is required of them to literally save the planet is to verbally accost, insult, and harass any person that you have identified as disagreeing with your beliefs. If you see a member of the current presidential administration seated at a restaurant with their spouse having dinner privately, as private as you can be when sitting at a restaurant, that you can gather a group of people and march into that restaurant and surround their table and cuss them out and shout at them and shame them. People actually believe that by doing things like this, that they are actively saving the planet. And how much intelligence or hard work or achievement does it take to be able to insult and harass someone on camera in a public space? Reopen society and shut down moral narcissism. This is a piece published yesterday by Cindy Simpson. Moral narcissists are helping to make sure America's COVID-19 lockdown continues in full force, shaming anyone who objects, refuses, questions, or even simply voices concerns or complaints. I know best how moral narcissism is destroying our republic if it hasn't already, is the title of Roger Simon's fascinating 2016 book on the subject of moral narcissism. Simon described this particular kind of narcissism as a far more lethal form that is destroying our families, friendships, workplace atmosphere, and democratic republic. That kind of lethality infecting the cure for a pandemic could certainly produce an outcome much worse than that of the virus itself. Simon describes the feelings of the moral narcissists this way. What you believe, or claim to believe, or say you believe, not what you do, or how you act, or what the results of your actions may be, defines you as a person and makes you good. It is how your life will be judged by others and by yourself. If your intentions are good, if they conform to the general received values of your friends, family, and co-workers, what a person of your class and social milieu is supposed to think, everything is fine. You are that good person. You are ratified. You can do anything you wish. It doesn't matter in the slightest what the results of those ideas and beliefs are, or how society, the country, and in some causes the world suffers from them. It doesn't matter that they misfire completely, cause terror attacks, illness, death, riots in the inner city, or national bankruptcy. You will be applauded and approved of. We're supposed to think that the continued shutdowns over the coronavirus are good. Those who dare to ask about the science and the models behind lockdown orders, the increasing collateral damage to our economy, or the difference between dying with or dying of the virus, much less the deaths that are happening because of the shutdown, received swift judgment from the moral narcissists. Not in the form of factual or intelligent answers, but rather questions framed to shame. Don't you care about Granny? Do you want more people to die? Is the economy more important to you than people's lives? For the moral narcissist, Simon quipped, a trip to Whole Foods in a Tesla became the equivalent of striking a blow against world hunger. Just like how I just observed about publicly insulting and harassing a politician about climate change is in the mind of the person doing so an act of actively saving the world. God, they must feel great about themselves. Today, wearing a mask while you shop, and only for essentials, plus making sure everyone wears one and also stays 6 feet away, has become the equivalent of saving people from dying. These moral narcissists don't trouble themselves with facts, such as the reality that everyone dies eventually, or that even before COVID-19, most people who died were elderly, and that most residents who moved into nursing homes were well over the age of average life expectancy and stayed less than 6 months. Neither quarantine the healthy nor social distancing are even remotely considered oxymoronic phrases by the moral narcissists, who also don't seem to worry about the psychological impacts of it on our children and on our nation's social cohesion. If the call to action in the name of public health has revealed the inner dictator of many of our government officials, they found their own army of volunteer enforcers. The moral narcissists, not only in the media, but in our own neighborhoods, such as the woman glaring balefully at us from her doorway yesterday afternoon. The shutdown orders may not be constitutional, but by God, they are moral. And if you disagree, especially if you disagree in an impassioned manner, then you're nothing but biologically ignorant, heartless spare parts. I mentioned yesterday that a friend of mine is now going to be allowed to return to work. His sector of employment has now been deemed essential in the somewhat moderating and slightly changing restrictions under which Washington State is currently living. He's of two minds about it. He's going to return to work on a full-time basis. And he's going to be making considerably less money than he's been making sitting at home. And many, many, many other people whose jobs are in different fields than his are still going to be sitting at home, and they're still going to be stacking up quite a bit of unearned cash. The poor guy's feeling extremely conflicted about things. And in some moments, he became downright despondent, viewing a lot of other people as having an opportunity to be sustained by government money while they reevaluate their lives and what they want to do with their futures. And he has to return to a life that he didn't find especially fulfilling and work very hard indeed to make a lot less money than what he was making by sitting at home waiting for his bank account to fill up automatically. I know that my friend is not alone in that internal conflict. Many people are feeling the same way. I'm feeling it too. That's going to cause a lot of division. People are going to grow extremely resentful as they have to return to construction jobs, which are very labor intensive and difficult, and earn less money than people they know personally who are sitting at home getting paid literally to do nothing. I predict that that's going to cause an enormous social rift. There's going to be a lot of jealousy. There's going to be a lot of resentment. And it's going to have consequences extending far into the future. It's going to be yet another tool by which we are separated and isolated from each other. Another division. It is remarkable to me that the outcome and the byproduct of these mitigation efforts has been to make it illegal for us to come together. Even when these restrictions are lifting, as they are lifting, there are new reasons for us to look upon one another with suspicion, jealousy, and resentment. The effects of this virus, of this pandemic, and more to the point, the effects of our strategy for containing and mitigating it are going to be felt for generations. And it's my sincere hope that enough of us hold on to a realistic view of this and are able to preserve what was so good about our society before this hit us. Thank you for listening. Be good to each other.